Hi everyone, and holy moly, we finally have made it to where we can make a final first prediction of the college football selection committee. Week 10 is finally in the books. We had an amazing day of college football, big matchup in the morning, couple of upsets in the evening, everything that you want out of football from a college football fan. We have so much to go over. We at Rankings Right Now are trying our best to come up with the best way to try and infer what the playoff committee is going to be releasing on Tuesday. For those of you who are new to Rankings Right Now, the only purpose that we try and accomplish is, can we predict what the rankings are going to be in real time? So we have this new poll that's coming out now in week 11 that we don't really have any full insight into what the selection committee is going to be releasing, but we can use historical voting patterns and other things that look similar to previous years, matchups, wins, losses, however you want to kind of put it together to try and infer what that rankings will be. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into www.rankingsrightnow.com to try and decipher everything that's going on right now in the playoff committee's brains. So here is the homepage of rankingsrightnow.com. You can see right here we're on the Rankings Right Now website. Now, why I bring this up is we have a algorithm that is trained on playoff committee data, but we have all been so tuned to the AP poll the last couple of weeks, whether you agree with the rankings or not, that we're in this situation where sometimes things can look a little wacky. So I want to start off a little bit slow and easy, and let's get into what we believe the rankings would be if the latest AP Top 25 was correct. Let's say that the selection committee aligned itself with the latest AP Top 25 algorithm, or rankings, I should say. So, using the selection committee algorithm based off of the latest AP poll, this is what things would look like after the Week 10 games have all been finished. So, excuse me, something's stuck in my mouth. We have Oregon 1, Ohio State 2, which is interesting because they've already played each other this year, Georgia 3, Miami 4, Penn State 5. So, why does Penn State only drop 2 slots? Well, if you think about it, they've had an undefeated season so far. They played a close game against Ohio State that's been battle-tested. It's not looking like a gigantic drop for Penn State, even though they really don't have that tough of a strength of schedule. According to the algorithm, there's still enough there for them to hang on to a top 5 ranking compared to Texas, Tennessee, Notre Dame, Indiana, teams like that. So Georgia is going to be losing a little bit of ground. Ohio State still sticking in there at number 2. It all makes sense to me because I've been watching these AP releases so closely that you start to kind of familiarize yourself. Things start to look natural, right? Alabama moving up a couple slots. Boise State moving up a couple slots. Ole Miss moving up a couple slots, right? Clemson dropping after they had their chance against Louisville. Pitt dropping after getting absolutely blown out against SMU. So these are the things that we're trying to keep into perspective of where these teams are going to be aligned going into this. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Let's say that the latest AP poll didn't exist. Let's say that we used the same playoff committee algorithm that's been trained on historical playoff committee data, and it never referenced the AP poll. It's just been tracking along this entire time and finished with today's outputs. What would that look like? So I have a side development server to try and play around with these rankings. And things change a little bit. Perceptions get thrown out the window, a lot of head scratching. It's very interesting to see where things line up. So let's dig into it a little bit. The biggest one by far that we went over a couple days ago and still true today because they were on a bye week, Notre Dame at number 2. Do I think Notre Dame is actually going to be ranked number 2? No. Do I think they could be a top 5? Yeah. If you look at their schedule, besides their week 2 loss against Northern Illinois, they've been crushing teams, and they have good wins on their schedule. They have a win against Louisville. They have a win against Georgia Tech. They have a win against Navy. They have good wins on their schedule. They have proven themselves besides a bad early season loss. They might be a top 5 team. I'm very interested to see where the playoff committee ends up ranking them in on Tuesday's rankings. But you know that the algorithm is onto something because everything else kind of seems aligned up top for the top 5 teams. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Georgia at 7, right? You're seeing a lot of teams that looks about right. Maybe Georgia should be a little bit higher. Maybe Penn State will drop a little bit more. But in the ballpark of where things should be. Another very interesting one after an enormous win this week is Ole Miss. Where does Ole Miss fit into all of this right now? When you look at Ole Miss's schedule, and let's just go to Ole Miss results that have been throughout the year, they have one bad loss. They should have beat Kentucky. But Kentucky's played teams tough all year long, and they have a good loss against a night road game against LSU, where they only lost by 3. That was a great game. Everything else, they destroy teams. Arkansas has a win against Tennessee this year. They blow them out at Arkansas. They win convincingly against Oklahoma. They win convincingly against South Carolina that has some really good wins on the season, including a win against Texas A&M today. The teams that they're far superior than, they leave no question of who the better team is on the field. I don't know what the playoff committee is going to think of Ole Miss. That is one of the biggest question marks that I think the algorithm has and that we all have going into this. Because to be ranked above Georgia is surprising to me. I found that to be very interesting on why that would be the case. Same thing with Alabama. Alabama has 2 losses on the year, same to Ole Miss. Alabama has that loss to Vandy, and I don't know if there's really anything else. They have a loss to Tennessee, which is a competitive team. Those 2 loss SEC schools, very, very curious on where they end up. And do you end up above an undefeated Indiana, an undefeated Miami, an undefeated BYU, SMU with 1 loss on the year, right? I think SMU has 1 loss on the year. Let's, if I remember correctly, I think they have, yes, and they lost to BYU really close, right? How are you going to handle those 2-loss SEC schools compared to 1 loss and no loss teams out here that aren't a part of a enormous conference, except for Indiana that's a part of the Big Ten, and they're really running show right now. So that is super interesting to me. Texas A&M, after their loss today, falls all the way down to 20. Pittsburgh, after getting blown out by SMU, drops down to 17 in the latest results. Mizzou's still hanging in there. Mizzou's another interesting one. If you look at their schedule, things just, they looked terrible against Alabama, right? They looked terrible against Texas A&M, but they were ranked so high at the beginning of the year that their algorithm kind of took them for granted just because they started the year ranked so high and they had a lot of wins, and their losses were against high quality opponents that from a strength of schedule perspective, it didn't drop them that much. So they're still hanging in there right now at a 13. I think that's going to be 18, 19, 20, maybe not even in the rankings, which would be an enormous bad prediction by the playoff committee ranking. So right now we're in this very weird spot. By the way, starting next week when we have the latest results of the playoff committee, everything will get realigned on the algorithm. The algorithm will now reference the true College Football Selection Committee Top 25 and make its projections out from there, make things a lot more sound, a lot more stable, a lot more authentic. right now we're in this really cool, fun space where everything is speculation. Everything is trying to figure out where in the world do all these teams fit. One interesting thing that we also can kind of like play around with, but Army at 14, Boise State at 22. Why would that be the case? Well, that's because Army is undefeated and Boise State has a loss against Oregon. Now, do I think that's actually going to be the truth? No. Actually, how I think the perception is going to be of that Boise State loss is that it really was a win against Oregon. Let's just say, for fun, we go back to week 2 and update this game. And let's say that Boise State would have finished with a win at or a touchdown at the very end and win that game 41-37. We can use the what if simulation tool to go back in time and project out forward to see where the rankings would be. So we can see from our simulation, we're going to go ahead and say Boise State actually won this game 41-37. Let's run the simulation. It's on a development server. It's going to take a smidge more time than it would on the normal website, but it still goes fast. If we go ahead and check out the rankings now, Oregon would move down to 5, Boise State up to 12. So the way that I am perceiving this, and Army now at 15, I don't think anyone would disagree with a Boise State at 12 and an Army at 15. The way that I think that the selection committee is going to evaluate all of this is they're still going to have Oregon over at number 1. They're not going to treat that game as a loss for Oregon, but I think they will treat it as a win for Boise State that early in the year to show how competitive they were. A lot of people at the time were just thinking that Oregon was just maybe not the team that everyone expected they were, but now they've all changed their minds on that perspective. But I think right now, if you think of where Boise should be, I think the playoff committee is going to evaluate that game as a win for Boise and now have them as maybe not a one-loss team for Boise State. If we go check them out real quick, right? They look good outside of that. They might not be playing the most toughest competitive schedule, but Wazoo is a good team. But if you look at each one of these ESPN FBI probabilities, which is the probability of who's going to win that game, Boise State is at least 85% likelihood of winning each of these games moving forward. So they are in a fantastic position to move into a top 12 team, at least for a group of 5 bid, which one team at least will get a group of 5 bid. It would be very interesting if Army can continue to win out. They play Notre Dame in a couple weeks. If they beat a very highly regarded team, according to the playoff committee, if they can beat Notre Dame, do we have 2 group of 5 teams that break into the top 12 outright? We don't even need a free bid handout, and they prove themselves. That's going to be super interesting. So all of this is very, very fun. Iowa State lost today. They're down to 17, or I should reset these scores and rerun the simulation to kind of get us back into the clear headspace of everything that actually has happened up until today. So, Iowa State at 16 with that loss today. Pitt, Michigan at 18, I find very, very interesting. They have a couple of losses, but according to their strength of schedule and who they've actually lost to, very respectable team. So very curious. I don't think they're going to be in the top 25. I think that's a bad prediction. Texas A&M down to 20, like we already said. Louisiana. Let's check out how Louisiana... Louisiana has one loss to Tulane, who's played well this year, and is kind of beating up on a bunch of weaker opponents, to put it nicely, right? Not in the toughest schedule ever. So that might be an interesting one. I don't know if Louisiana is going to be all the way up until 19. I think Boise State will be higher. Wazoo, CU, Kansas State lost today. They're down to 25. Clemson. Oh, Clemson, you had your chance. Clemson, if you see that they're ranked 27, and with a drop of 6, that means that the algorithm had them at 21 going into this weekend. The algorithm only had them at 21 because their strength of schedule is nothing this year. They've beat a bunch of nobodies. They had their chance to prove that they were a legit contender by beating Louisville today at home, at night, and they blew it. I don't know where they're going to sit now, because I really would not be surprised if they're not in the top 25. The ACC is in a really strange situation. With Pitt losing to SMU and losing bad, SMU is part of the ACC, which is also funny to say, with no one really close around them. They might get a top 4 bid, and that's going to be enormous for SMU, right? That's going to be, and like, there's Pittsburgh didn't look good. Clemson, like, there's no one else from the ACC that's really even representing. Florida State was in previous years hanging in there, but I mean, so much to decipher. This is so much fun. I enjoy it. Please go ahead and go to rankingsrightnow.com. Play around with the what if simulation tool. Check out different results. And at the end of the day, just as a reminder to everybody, we're trying to enhance the college football experience here. We're trying to add an element to your Saturdays when you're watching, and Louisville is beating Clemson, and you can look at your phone to see, well, where's Clemson going to go to and where's Louisville going to go to? How does this alter the rankings? When Penn State's making that final push, what's going to happen if Penn State wins versus what happens if Penn State loses? Like, these things are all getting mixed up so much, and rankings matter in college football. They're a focal point of all the conversations that we have around college football. We want this algorithm to continue to get better as time goes on, to make the experience better for you as the fan, and hopefully give full clarity to the range of potential rankings of all of your favorite teams. So create a login on rankingsrightnow.com. Pick your favorite teams, easier to follow that way. Play around with the what if simulation tool. It's all free. It's fun. We'll go ahead and check back in a couple of days to see where the playoff committee actually ranked and see which of these outputs was closest. If you use the AP poll, was that better than just saying we're not going to reference the AP poll at all? It gives you a little bit of insight into how the playoff committee is thinking. So a ton to discuss. It's going to be fun for here. There's still a lot of football left. It feels like you're towards the end because now we're getting to these playoff committee rankings, but still a ton of football to be going off of, and to that could completely change everything that we think about when it comes to who's going to be ranked and why. So buckle in. It's going to be a fun couple of next weeks, and we'll check in with you here soon on how close the model was to the true predictions, and then we'll move on from there. Thank you so much for joining into the discussion tonight.